100 years ago, owning a railroad was the ultimate power move. Today, it's oil fields, data centers, and satellite networks. But what if the next trillion-dollar business isn't on Earth at all? What if the biggest real estate opportunity in history is floating 250 miles above our heads? It sounds like science fiction, but governments and private companies are already spending billions to make it happen. The question isn't whether humans will build commercial space stations. The real question is whether owning one could become one of the most profitable businesses ever created, or one of the most expensive financial disasters in history. Right now, there's only one continuously occupied space station in orbit, the International Space Station. It wasn't built to make money. It was built as a scientific partnership between nations. Estimates suggest it has cost well over $150 billion across its lifetime, making it one of the most expensive engineering projects ever undertaken. But here's the twist. The ISS is nearing retirement, and NASA doesn't want to own its replacement. Instead, the agency plans to become a customer. Rather than building and operating another government station, NASA hopes to buy services from privately owned orbital platforms. That changes everything. Imagine opening a luxury hotel where every room has the greatest view in human history. Except your guests aren't just tourists. They're astronauts, scientists, pharmaceutical companies, manufacturers, filmmakers, and even national governments without their own space programs. That's the business model. Of course, building a space station isn't remotely comparable to building a hotel on Earth. Let's start with the biggest expense: construction. A modern commercial station would likely require multiple pressurized modules, solar arrays, docking ports, life support equipment, robotics, computers, communication systems, and extensive testing. Industry analysts often estimate development costs in the several billion-dollar range before the first customer ever arrives. Depending on the station's size and capabilities, the investment could easily climb into the tens of billions. And that's before launch. Getting massive hardware into orbit remains incredibly expensive, even though launch costs have fallen dramatically over the last decade. Reusable rockets have changed the economics, but sending hundreds of tons of equipment into low Earth orbit still requires dozens of launches, careful assembly, and years of engineering. Then comes operations. Unlike a building on Earth, a space station never gets a day off. Life support systems run 24 hours a day. Power systems constantly track the sun. Air must be recycled. Water must be purified. Software requires continuous monitoring. Tiny pieces of orbital debris travel faster than rifle bullets, meaning collision avoidance becomes part of everyday business. Even replacing a broken valve could require launching replacement hardware from Earth. The payroll isn't exactly cheap either. You'll need aerospace engineers, flight controllers, robotic specialists, orbital mechanics experts, software developers, medical teams, communications operators, cybersecurity professionals, and mission planners. This isn't a company with minimum wage employees. These are some of the highest paid technical experts in the world.
So why would anyone invest billions into such an expensive business? Because the potential revenue streams are surprisingly diverse. The first is government contracts. NASA has already signaled that it prefers purchasing services rather than owning future stations itself. Other space agencies may also rent laboratory space, astronaut accommodations, or research facilities instead of building their own orbital infrastructure. Long-term government contracts alone could provide relatively stable income. Next comes scientific research. Microgravity changes how materials behave. Proteins can form differently. Certain crystals grow more uniformly. Biotechnology companies are exploring whether medicines can be developed more efficiently in space than on Earth. If a pharmaceutical breakthrough worth billions depends on orbital research, paying several $1 million for laboratory time suddenly doesn't sound outrageous. Manufacturing could become even more valuable. On Earth, gravity constantly interferes with certain industrial processes. In orbit, manufacturers can experiment with ultra-pure fiber optics, advanced semiconductors, specialized alloys, and other high-value materials that may be difficult or impossible to produce under Earth's gravity. The volumes might remain small, but the profit margins could be enormous. Tourism is another obvious opportunity. We've already seen private individuals pay enormous sums for short trips into space. As launch costs continue falling, wealthy travelers may eventually book multi-day stays aboard commercial stations. Think about it. Luxury hotels charge thousands of dollars per night because of ocean views or historic locations. A hotel overlooking the entire planet, that's an entirely different pricing category. Then there's media. Movies, documentaries, live sporting events, advertising campaigns, and streaming productions filmed in genuine microgravity could command premium licensing deals. Companies might even pay for product launches literally performed in orbit. Now let's do a simplified numbers breakdown. Imagine a commercial station that costs roughly $12 billion to design, build, launch, and certify. Annual operating expenses, including staff, maintenance, launches, insurance, communications, and logistics, might reach around $700 million. Now imagine multiple revenue sources. Government contracts generate $500 million annually. Scientific research brings in another $300 million. Manufacturing leases contribute $250 million. Tourism earns $400 million. Media, sponsorships, and commercial partnerships produce another $150 million. That's roughly $1.6 billion in annual revenue. Subtract approximately $700 million in operating costs, and the business could produce around $900 million before financing, taxes, depreciation, and future expansion. Those aren't predictions. They're simply illustrative numbers showing how several different revenue streams could combine into a potentially sustainable business.
But here's what many people misunderstand. They assume space tourism is the entire business. It's probably not. The tourists make headlines. The research contracts pay bills. Think about airlines. Most people think airlines make their money selling tickets. Yet cargo, loyalty programs, premium seating, partnerships, and credit card agreements often contribute enormous portions of airline profits. Commercial space stations may work the same way. The glamorous business attracts attention. The boring contracts generate reliable cash flow. Now comes the biggest risk of all: demand. Building the station is only half the challenge. You also need enough paying customers. That's much harder. How many governments will regularly lease orbital laboratories? How many pharmaceutical companies truly need microgravity? How many tourists can realistically afford space travel? How many manufacturers will discover products valuable enough to justify orbital production? If those markets grow slower than expected, even a perfectly engineered station could become an incredibly expensive asset with too few customers. Competition creates another problem. Several private companies are already developing commercial station concepts. If multiple stations enter orbit around the same time, prices could fall as operators compete for limited demand. It's similar to hotels. The first luxury resort in town often enjoys strong pricing power. 10 luxury resorts built together, everyone starts discounting rooms. There's also technological risk. Space technology evolves incredibly fast. A station designed today could face newer, cheaper, more efficient competitors within a decade. Owners would likely need continuous upgrades just to remain competitive. Insurance presents another financial challenge. Launching humans into orbit carries substantial risk. Hardware failures, launch delays, supply interruptions, radiation exposure, or orbital debris collisions could create enormous financial losses. Ensuring these operations isn't cheap. Then there's regulation. Unlike opening a business downtown, operating in space involves international treaties, licensing requirements, export controls, frequency coordination, and government oversight from multiple countries. Legal complexity alone becomes a major operating cost. Here's the irony: the biggest threat may not be engineering, it may be economics. History is full of incredible technologies that arrived before profitable business models existed. The Concorde proved supersonic passenger flight was possible. It never became a mass-market business. Early electric cars existed decades before battery technology
became economically competitive. Timing matters. Commercial space stations face the same challenge. The technology is advancing rapidly. The business model is still being tested. If launch costs continue falling, private research expands, manufacturing breakthroughs emerge, and tourism becomes more affordable, today's billion-dollar investments could someday look remarkably cheap. If those trends don't happen quickly enough, investors may wait decades for acceptable returns. That's why owning a commercial space station isn't really a bet on tourism. It's a bet on the future space economy itself. Every successful industry eventually needs infrastructure. Railroads enabled industrial America. Airports enabled global aviation. Data centers enabled cloud computing. Commercial space stations could become the infrastructure that supports the next generation of businesses beyond Earth. Or they could become expensive monuments to optimism that arrived a little too early. And that's what makes this one of the most fascinating business opportunities of the 21st century. Because if humanity truly begins building a permanent commercial economy in orbit, the companies that own the stations won't just be renting rooms in space, they'll be renting access to an entirely new marketplace. The next time you look up at the night sky, remember this: somewhere above you, the foundation of tomorrow's economy may already be taking shape. And whether commercial space stations become the next great infrastructure business or remain a costly experiment will depend on one simple question. Every investor eventually asks, can this incredible idea actually make money?
If you enjoyed breaking down the economics behind Andys's businesses like this, subscribe and stick around, because sometimes the most unbelievable business ideas turn out to be the ones that reshape the world.